All right, so how many of you know Elonka? Show of hands. All right. Four.
That's between you and her.
So, Elonka actually found out about PhreakNIC through DragonCon. How many of you know DragonCon? Big sci-fi convention in Atlanta, like 40,000 of you and your closest friends. And she showed up for the EFF track, which is their hacker track of programming there, so our Hacking 101, 201 type stuff. And she kind of got curious about this PhreakNIC thing we were talking about and hyping, and we had released a code at PhreakNIC 3 which no one had broken, and I think it was about 8 months on at that point. So she got online, she got a copy of the code, she started playing around with it, never had done any crypto cipher type stuff before, and she wound up breaking the code and following the instructions, which were, what, posting a bizarre haiku to the SE2600 mailing list.
Gee, who wrote that? Who came up with that idea? Okay.
Alcohol inspired, like all the best things in life. So she won as a prize free admission to PhreakNIC 4, I believe it was, showed up at the con, and we kind of sucked her into the world of hackerdom, and she's been stuck here ever since. In the meantime, it has inspired a really, really cool book here, which we've got copies for sale on the table over there. If you're into crossword puzzles and stuff like this is way better. Secret codes and ciphers, and it's about some of the famous unsolved ones throughout history, and it'll walk you through from the very simple ones to really complicated ones. I've got an autographed copy. Snag yours now. This is the first edition, which there's going to be a second edition soon, so get your first edition here now. There are only a few copies left. She'll autograph it, and then when the second edition comes out, you can sell this for a bloody fortune on eBay. She's also got a copy here of the Voynich Manuscript, which is one of the more famous unsolved codes in history, ciphers in history. I'll be passing that around for y'all to look at throughout the talk. Please don't steal it or try to steal it, and we'll have to kill you. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Elonka take over, and I've seen variations on this talk before, and it's really, really cool. And by the way, those of you who are interested in Kryptos, know what Kryptos is, and after her talk, he might be on to something as far as breaking part 4, the currently unsolved part of Kryptos, and we'll be heading upstairs to the 9th floor after the talks to work on that throughout the night.
Has she sold the PhreakNIC 13 code?
13?
Not 13 now.
No. Okay. I've solved. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Do you want to take questions during the talk, or do you want you to wait until afterwards? Use the audience mic.
Questions during is fine, depending on how we're doing for time. Originally, I was going to give 2 talks, one on Kryptos and one on the Voynich manuscript, but there was some scheduling, so I'm trying to condense 2 talks into one session. So I'm going to be going really, really fast through a few things. Johnny X has already covered some of it, thanks. And I really have to say I'm excited to be speaking at PhreakNIC again, because if it were not for PhreakNIC, I would not be where I am today. I wouldn't, thank you, thank you. I would not have a list of the world's most famous unsolved codes on my website. I would not have a book out. Dan Brown, the author of Da Vinci Code, I helped him with the research for his next novel, The Lost Symbol. He actually named a character after me in that novel, and that would not have happened without PhreakNIC. So first, thank you.
I forgot to mention that in the intro.
So, and yeah, it all comes back to DragonCon, and where Johnny X and a bunch of the other people from SE2600 were handing out codes, flyers, including the PhreakNIC 3 code. I took it home, back to St. Louis with me. I was bored one week. I was homesick with the flu while DEF CON was going on. I was really upset that I couldn't go to DEF CON. I started looking at the code. Took me a while, I think 10 days. I got totally antisocial. I wouldn't talk to anyone. I was in total code zone. Cracked it, won a free trip to PhreakNIC. And then started cracking a bunch of other codes in the hacker scene to the point where he actually banned me from competition. At the AtlantaCon convention, when there was a code released, at the bottom of the code it said, "Note, past puzzle crackers are ineligible for prizes associated with solving the AtlantaCon puzzle. Give someone else a chance, Elonka." So, of course, I had to go and crack that one too. And then kind of just covering the story of how I got involved with Kryptos is right around this time, September 11th happened, and a horrible tragedy, and I was as enraged as everyone else by what had happened. And I actually had a cousin who was working in D.C. at the time, and he was actually supposed to be at the Pentagon that morning. And he was running late for the meeting because he was having printer problems. And then he got the problems resolved. He's on his way to the Pentagon. he's checking the messages on his cell phone, and his cell phone actually crashed because of all the messages from people that were calling him saying, a plane just hit the Pentagon, don't go. And the plane actually hit right where he was supposed to be. So some of the people that he was supposed to brief were killed that morning. And so after September 11th, I flew to Washington, D.C. to hug my cousin. I was glad he was okay. And we went to the Pentagon Memorial. We put a small American flag there. And then we were driving around D.C. and he said, well, as long as you're here, is there anything else you'd like to see? There's kind of a lot of tourist attractions here in Washington. And I said, well, no, I just want to see you, and I'm glad that you're okay. And he says, well, that's nice, I like to see you too, but really, is there anything else you want to see? And it occurred to me when I've been working on the PhreakNIC code, the PhreakNIC 3 code, that there had been certain dead ends that had been built into the code. Like, okay, go solve this, but it was just a red herring, and go solve this. And one of the, haha, go solve this, was an encrypted link to the CIA website, pointing to the Kryptos page on the CIA website saying, haha, go solve this. And that was where I'd first heard of Kryptos. And Kryptos, it's a sculpture at the center of CIA headquarters. It's about 12 feet tall and 20 feet long. It's 4 large copper plates with thousands of characters inscribed through them. You're actually looking through the sculpture to see the other side there. And so I told my cousin, yeah, let's go see Kryptos. And he said, where is it? And I said, it's at the center of CIA. And he said, okay, let's go drive over and see if we can get in. And long story short, we had to find CIA because there's no street address. You can't just go to MapQuest and say, give me directions to CIA. And we finally figured out where it was, and we drove in, and then there's no kind of a service road. You can't kind of like drive around CIA. You take the exit, and you're there, and there's a guard shack, and there's walls, and there's barbed wire, and there's these big guys with guns pouring out of the guard shack asking a reasonable question right after September 11th, which is, who are you and why are you here? And we said, okay, well, we're here to see Kryptos. And they said, oh, sorry, official business only. And so then my cousin and I are like, can we talk our way into CIA? And so we tried to come up with different ways of getting past the guards and saying, can we get is there a public tour day? And they said, no, official business only. And we said, can I get an invitation from my congressman? No, official business only. And we tried various methods. We kept getting turned away, and like I said, big guys, guns. So we finally, said okay, couldn't get in, and drove away. But I kept thinking official business only, official business only. So along with this, and again, I'm taking a really long story and I'm condensing it here. Along with all this stuff with September 11th and war on terrorism, I was wondering if I could help out with the war on terrorism with the knowledge that I'd gained about cryptography. And I called my local FBI in St. Louis, and I said, hi, I know all sorts of stuff about cryptography. Can I help? And they said no. So then I called back the next week, and I kept asking, and they kept saying no. And finally I got an agent and said, well, what is it that you know about? And I said, well, I know a little bit about these kinds of cryptography and UU encoding and PGP and steganography and da-da. And he said, oh, steganography. We've been hearing rumors that Al-Qaeda might have been using steganography as a way of planning the September 11th attacks. And we're sure that there's cryptographers in D.C. that know all about this stuff, but we're here in St. Louis. Cryptography isn't really our mission. And maybe you could come in and give a little talk about steganography. So steganography is a way of hiding messages inside of pictures on the internet. And I put together this large talk, 70 PowerPoint slides, about how I didn't believe Al-Qaeda was using steganography, but I traced down why the rumors about it had started, which traced back to a mosque in Milan, Italy. And then I started talking about what kind of codes that Al-Qaeda was using. Like they're using simple stuff. Like if they were talking on a cell phone and they wanted to say FBI, instead of saying FBI, they'd say food and beverage industry. And just really, really simple stuff. So I gave this talk, and then I said, maybe I can use this talk as the official business that'll get me into CIA headquarters. So every time I'd give the talk, I would mention, boy, I'd love to give this talk at CIA. Boy, I'd love to give this talk at CIA. And then I was giving the talk at DEF CON, DEF CON Las Vegas. And I was when it was at the Alexis Park, and it was the big tent on the roof of the building, if you remember that. And there was about 1,000 people in the tent, and I'm giving my talk about steganography. And at the end of the talk, people come up, they give you business cards and stuff. And one person came up to the podium, and they leaned over and they said, I work at Langley. I think I can get you in. So it was an undercover op at DEF CON who worked at CIA who heard my talk and was saying, okay, I can get Elonka into CIA. So again, long story short, I made them verify that they worked at CIA, because they only gave me a first name and a phone number, and I was saying, maybe it's a hacker who's just pulling my chain saying that they work at CIA, but don't really work at CIA. So I said, you have to prove that you work at CIA. And they said, well, how do we prove it? And I said, well, send me an email from an official CIA address. And they said, we don't have an email from an official CIA address. And I said, well, get an email from an official CIA address. So about a week goes by and I get an email from at ucia.gov, unclassified CIA.gov. And then I wrote back to make sure it was a real address. It wasn't just a spoofed email or something. And then, again, long story short, I was invited into CIA, so I got to see Kryptos up close. And I made some rubbings of the sculpture, and then I made a web page about it. And that web page changed my life, because all of a sudden people all over the world were writing to me about Kryptos. And they're saying, oh, you've seen him in person. You know, what is this like? And, you know, what does, you know, how did this appear to you? And do you know the artist? And all these things. And I started just being a helpful person. I started putting information on my website. I would research. I'd write to his agent. Eventually I got to know the artist himself. And my website, elonka.com/Kryptos, just kept growing and growing and growing, to the point where I started getting invited to speak just about Kryptos. And that became a major part of my life. Then Dan Brown, the author, contacted me because he was working Kryptos into part of his next novel. And then that happened, and then a British book publisher contacted me and said, oh, we want you to write a book on codes to coincide with the release of the next Dan Brown movie. And it just kept growing and growing, and people said, oh yeah, and how famous is Kryptos? So I looked around, and there wasn't one at the time, but I made a list of the world's most famous unsolved codes. I talked to several famous cryptographers, checked several books, worked with the editors of the Cryptologia academic journal. And the list is actually a lot longer than this on my webpage. But basically, I put Kryptos at about number 5. And the number 1 most famous unsolved code in the world I list is something called the Beale ciphers, which is related to some encrypted messages that were found in Virginia that have to do with what may be a treasure, a large treasure that's buried near Bedford there. And it's related, one of the messages can be decrypted with the Declaration of Independence. So if you've seen any of those movies that are all talking about these codes, a lot of them relate to the Beale ciphers. But I'm not going to talk about the Beale ciphers today. Today I'm going to be talking about number 2 and number 5, so the Voynich manuscript and Kryptos. And the Voynich manuscript, I made a complete replica of it. It's a document, it's got hundreds of pages. It dates back to the early 1400s. There's only one copy of it, and there's nothing like it in existence anywhere else that we know of. The one copy is currently at the Yale University Voynich Rare Book Library. And I went to the website, and then they have scans of the pages, so I downloaded all the scans and then compiled them all into a book, including all the fold-out sections, and you'll see them as the book is going around there. So I'll come back to Kryptos in a minute. So the Voynich manuscript, 232 pages remaining. There's a few pages that have disappeared over the years. There was new research on it as there was radiocarbon dating that was done by the University of Arizona. They took samples from 4 different pages and dated them, saying to between 1408 and 1438. Now, this doesn't mean that that's when the manuscript was created. That means that that's when the sheep that the manuscript, the pages came from, the vellum, they lived during that period of time. It's possible that someone took this old vellum and then later wrote on it. We don't know. But the language in it is like no language. We don't know what language it is. It's not similar to any other language. And the characters, the alphabet there, are not similar to any known script. There's a lot of research that's been done on it, especially since it was rediscovered in 1912 by a man named Wilfrid Voynich, which is where the manuscript got its name. People have spent their entire lives researching this thing. And if you go to Google and type in, you'll find a ton of stuff, all kinds of theories, people taking some of the diagrams in the Voynich manuscript, making 3D models out of them. And it's written in this very careful hand. Someone was obviously comfortable with the script. It's not just kind of random scribblings. There's a calligraphy style to it. And hundreds of pages, most of them have illustrations, and many of them have pictures of plants. However, these hundreds of pictures of plants are not like any known species. Sometimes you see something and you think, oh, I sort of know what that flower is, but then the leaves won't be anything like that flower. Or you'll recognize the leaves, but the flower won't be right, and the root system will be different. So again, it's a big mystery. Someone took a lot of time, probably years of work, to create this manuscript. Now, one thing that's been noticed sometimes is that the roots tend to have this sort of a trunk, a cap shape. So wondering, maybe somebody was grafting different plants together and writing about what they did. Again, we don't know. I can't say anything for sure about it. I can just talk about some of the theories that have been coming out about it. Some other plants. I'll just go through a few pages here. A lot of work went into this. And then past the plants, in another section of the manuscript, we have the swimming ladies. And there are dozens and dozens of pictures of these tiny naked women all through this manuscript. And they tend to be swimming in these pools of water, maybe green water, or they're cavorting with these pipes which seem to be pouring water in different places. And again, it doesn't resemble anything, but someone seems to have taken great care to draw this what one researcher called a plumber's nightmare throughout the manuscript. And this is going into more about one particular page. So we have a flower here, and some people look at that and go, oh, it sort of looks like a passion flower. And it's sort of kind of familiar. And then the text, there was actually the first machine-readable transcript of all of the text was created by William Friedman, who was a code breaker from World War II. And his team could crack some major codes. They cracked the Japanese purple cipher. They cracked several other historical ciphers. They put together a team on Voynich. Couldn't crack Voynich. But they did come up with a way of trying to transcribe some of the letters of Voynich into something that we could read or maybe even pronounce. And it seems to have a kind of a grammar to it. Like there's certain letters that are doubled and other letters that won't be doubled. When there's a plant page, the first word on that page is usually, that word appears only on that page throughout the manuscript. So it implies that that's the name of whatever this particular plant is. But we haven't been able to find any one-to-one correspondence. Now, it looks like other manuscripts from around that time period that were called herbal manuscripts. So this is not Voynich, this is a different, and this one came from about the 15th century, and these, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, the De Materia Medica, I don't know if anyone can correct me on that. These dated to thousands of years ago when there would be information collected about different kinds of plants and what their medicinal purposes were. And originally it was just in text, it was often in Arabic, sometimes it would be in Latin. And then around the 15th century, actually, 15th century and a few earlier, they started adding diagrams. But these diagrams were normally very detailed diagrams. You could easily identify the plant. This is another one that's not Voynich, but this is from the 6th century. And you can see we have that same kind of pattern of a very careful drawing of a plant with text kind of surrounding it. So this is from 6th century, Voynich manuscript dating to the early 1400s. So it seems to be trying to follow that system, but we can't identify the plants or the language or the script. Just big mystery. And then botanical identification. So this one where it sort of looks like a passion flower. Well, these are two pictures of actual passion flowers on the left. You can sort of see a resemblance, but generally it's known that passion flowers have 10 petals sticking out. Voynich, you got 5 sticking out. So kind of think, if you were going to draw a picture of a passion flower, how would you draw it? Would you draw it the way it appears on the Voynich manuscript? And it seems like somebody was either working from something different than they saw or deliberately almost trying to encrypt the images of the plants that they were trying to portray. For the recording, the question is, are there any duplicate images of plants throughout the Voynich manuscript? I have to say, I'm not that well versed on every single one. I've definitely created this replica that's being passed around. I don't remember seeing any duplicates, but there are some pages, and actually this is one of them, where instead of showing full plants, they're showing parts of plants. So it's possible that these parts relate to some of the other images, but I haven't researched that particular thing. There are websites you can go to where people think they've identified the plants, and it's just pages and pages where we show, well, we think this manuscript is, or this image is this plant, and this image is this plant. And then there will be another set of web pages where they're debunking everything that's going through, and it's just tons of speculation about it. There's also several pages towards the end where we have these odd cylinders that are showing on the left-hand side, and there's several pages like that. And so again, there's speculation. What are these cylinders? Are they containers of some sort? Are they urns? And One theory, and I'm including it here, is that early microscopes sort of have a resemblance to the cylinders that we're seeing on the page, but the science of microscopes and telescopes really didn't start until the 1600s, maybe the late 1500s. And again, we have these pages that date to the early 1400s. So what does that mean? Does it mean that maybe someone in the late 1500s or early 1600s found a book of blank pages, which is possible. They'd create the books blank sometimes, and maybe somebody found an old one and they wrote in it. Maybe they created it as a hoax. Maybe they created it to sell it to someone, like, ooh, look, I have a very mysterious herbal, which is one of the theories. Emperor Rudolph, the Holy Roman Emperor around the late 1500s, he was known to buy curiosities, and he spent a lot of money on them. And he actually did purchase the Voynich manuscript, or it's believed that he purchased it, because we have a letter reciting information saying, well, I heard from someone who heard from someone that the Emperor Rudolph purchased the Voynich for 600 gold ducats. That would be about $80,000 in modern currency. And then some of the fold-out pages are very interesting as well. This is called the Rosette page. And if you get a chance to look at it as it's going by, it actually looks like a map if you get up close to it. And some people have also speculated that it sort of looks like, well, maybe someone did have a microscope and they were looking at something and trying to draw the images that they were seeing. Or maybe they were using a telescope, in some way playing with optics and lenses. There was one theory that Roger Bacon may have been the person that penned the manuscript, but he lived around the 1200s, so could not have written something that was on paper from the 1400s. Then again, another theory, maybe he did write something and then someone else copied it later on. So again, just more questions, more mysteries. And in the top right is something that gets a lot of study as part of the map, which is in the circle, there's a castle there. And if we look closely at the castle, the battlements of the castle have a very distinctive shape. These battlements, it's called swallowtail battlements or merlons. And castles with that particular kind of architectural element around the time that we think the manuscript was made tended to only exist in northern Italy. So that makes some people believe that probably that's where it was created. But then again, why? You know, it's not Italian, but somebody put a lot of work into it. Just lots of questions. I can't give you the answers to these. I can just tell you the current thinking about it. One theory that went through Scientific American a few years ago was that it was a hoax, and a man named Gordon Rugg came up with a theory of how he thought the Voynich manuscript could have been created. If someone used a card and grill, if they had a chart of different symbols or digraphs, and then move this card with the different holes on it around and then copy what you saw. So that way you'd get the sense of writing with fluency, even though it might not necessarily mean anything. However, in the years since he published this theory, he and his team have never been able to replicate a single part of the manuscript. So it's an idea, but has not been proven. So just very briefly, here's the theory. So is it a hoax? Well, it's a hell of a hoax if someone created it as a fraud, because it obviously took a long time to make. Hundreds of pages of careful calligraphy, all these careful drawings. That's a lot of work to go into a hoax. Maybe it's some sort of artificial language, but people have looked into that idea, and they say that the patterns don't match of what they'd kind of expect from the structure of an artificial language. Is it just gibberish or gibberish, depending how you pronounce it? But they say no, because the patterns are too regular. They're where words appear and how the letters are structured next to each other. Is it encrypted? Maybe, but why would it be encrypted? And what about all these plants? Aliens, sorry, forgot to mention the aliens theory. Another theory is that maybe it's a dead language. Maybe there was some little micronation somewhere in northern Italy that had a language and a script that has since been lost, and it was written in that language. Another thing to think about is alchemy. At the time, it was very popular to try and figure out how to turn copper into gold or lead into gold, and maybe someone thought they'd figured it out and they were writing it down in an encrypted way so they wouldn't get in trouble with the Inquisition. Maybe someone had figured out lenses and they're trying to draw what they see, or maybe someone was just schizophrenic and they were receiving dictation from angels at the time and they were trying to write down whatever it was they thought the angels were saying to them.
The Book of Mormon.
There we go. The Book of Mormon. And all the bathing ladies, maybe someone thought they'd figured out the elixir of life, the fountain of youth, and they were trying to record this information. Who knows? Right? Okay. So summary about Voynich, then I'll go back over to Kryptos. Created in the early 1400s, or at least that's when the vellum was created, and the dyes, the paints have also been tested and are consistent with the materials that were available in that time period. It's probably northern Italy, maybe, but no known language, no known alphabet, can't identify the plants, and the way it's known is the world's most mysterious manuscript. So, going on to a more modern puzzle. Oh.
Biological sampling, like looking for bacteria and stuff on it.
Biological sampling. I know they've done the radiocarbon dating, and I know that they've taken samples of the pigments from the paints, but I don't know if anyone's done any kind of a biological analysis.
Because it could identify possibly where, make sure where exactly it was, certain plant species or insects, bacteria only exist in certain areas.
If I don't know enough about biology to say if bacteria would survive for hundreds of years. There's definitely a lot of things that could use more research from Voynich. Absolutely. Voynich discovered. The question is, where was it when Voynich discovered? It was 1912, and he was an antique book dealer, and he was buying manuscripts from the Villa Mondragone in Rome. It's a pontifical university. They were short on funds, so they were kind of discreetly selling some of their archives, and he purchased about 30 manuscripts from them at the time. He wrote about it saying that Voynich looked sort of like an ugly duckling at the time because he was seeing all these other beautifully illuminated manuscripts, and then there was Voynich, which didn't match the style, but was still interesting. He thought at the time he bought it that it might have been written by Roger Bacon. If it was a Bacon manuscript, it would have been worth a fortune. I don't know exactly how much he spent for it, though. Question in the back. The question is, was there handwriting analysis? And the answer is yes. And as with anything about Voynich, there are differing opinions, but the general consensus is that it was all written by one person, possibly by two people. I know there's been research on like how many strokes were used for each letter. I mean, they've really gone in and looked at it at a detailed level. They know it was written with a quill pen. And then all of it, the way, and they say the same person who wrote the text was also the person who created the drawings. So just trying to envision a person to have the resources and time and knowledge or lack of knowledge or what, but just to spend that much time to create this really kind of boggles the mind. What were they doing? And this kind of vellum, each sheet of paper in the manuscript was basically one animal, one sheep, like I think it was the stomach skin of a sheep. So it's basically a whole flock of sheep that went into the creation of the manuscript. So the question is, whoever made this, it wasn't just somebody on the street. Someone had means to acquire this somehow. Just lots of questions. Yes?
Beloved PhreakNIC attendees, please use the microphone to ask your questions, or I'll have to break out the cattle prod. And Elonka, to your left.
Okay. Was I out of the light? Was that it? Move towards the light. Okay. So some of you may have seen in the news recently something about Copial cipher, which was just over the last week or two. I first heard about it because the articles that were showing up said, and now this team that has cracked the Copial cipher is going to turn their attention to Kryptos and the Voynich manuscript. And I was like, who are these people? And what this was is an 18th century manuscript that was located in, I think, Eastern Europe by a team, combination Swedish and American team. And they transcribed it and they put their program on it and they cracked it. And it wasn't that difficult of a cipher. When we find these historical manuscripts, most of the time the encryption that is used is something that was invented at the time, and it's usually what's called a homophonic cipher, which is several different characters could mean one particular plain text character. And with modern computers, we crack them really, really fast. But when the news went out, most people, the public kind of doesn't know which encrypted manuscript is which encrypted manuscript. So there was confusion when it went out, like, oh, the Copial cipher was cracked. That means the Voynich was cracked. And so I had to do some damage control as reporters were contacting us saying, no, this is not the Voynich manuscript. No, this doesn't mean that the world's most famous unsolved code was cracked. It means that another historical manuscript that was encrypted has been cracked. And so that's just a picture of Copial. So, Kryptos. How am I doing on time? Okay. So again, more modern. This one was created in 1990. The sculptor is still living. His name is Jim Sanborn. He lives in Washington, D.C. He was born in 1945. And he was commissioned by the CIA to create Kryptos because the CIA was commissioning a new building in the 1980s. They had their original headquarters building, then they were commissioning a new headquarters building, and they wanted art to go around the building. And they put together a committee, which put together a committee, which went in and invited artists to create art. Jim Sanborn was invited. He'd never created anything with encryption before, but he had worked with art, what he called invisible forces. He liked the idea of making invisible forces visible. So he had several works that dealt with magnetism or the Coriolis force or other things that affect us but that we can't necessarily see. And the committee created by a committee that was selecting the artists sort of liked the idea of an artist who was dealing with invisible forces creating art to go with the CIA. They liked that idea of sort of fit in with the hidden mission. And so he got the gig to create the art, and then he did some research on the CIA and decided he wanted to do a sculpture with a theme of encryption. And he didn't know anything about encryption at the time, so he was teamed with a man named Ed Scheidt, who was the chairman of the CIA Cryptographic Center, in the process of retiring. And Ed got together with Jim over a period of months and taught Jim various basic forms of encryption. Then Jim went off by himself, I think, to southwestern United States, where he was picking up some materials, came up with the messages to be encrypted, and carved them into the sculpture. He said he carved all the letters by hand, and it took him about 2 years to do. There are 4 messages that we know of that are on the sculpture. 3 of the 4 have been cracked. The 4th has not been cracked and is considered to be one of the most famous unsolved codes in the world. I'll go into what those first 3 messages say. When I had the opportunity to see the sculpture up close, I was able to get some rubbings of it. These are scans of the rubbings. Each one of these was done on a standard 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper to kind of give you an idea of the size of the letters. And I found out, as I was doing research on it, that in 1992, the CIA's deputy director had kind of thrown down the gauntlet to the NSA director, saying, okay, you guys are so hot, let's see how hot you are. The NSA is the code cracking branch of the United States government. So the NSA's director was Vice Admiral John Mike McConnell at the time. He took up the challenge and he put together a team, and they ran computer attacks with the NSA's computers trying to solve Kryptos. They did solve the first 3 parts, couldn't solve part 4. If it would have been like an enemy cipher at the time, they probably would have said needs more collection, because part 4 is very short. It's only 97 characters, and it's very difficult to crack a very short cipher. So then the NSA, they wrote up a memo about what they'd solved with the first 3 parts, and they sent that off to CIA. I've been trying to get a hold of that memo. I actually filed a Freedom of Information Act request to try and get a hold of that memo. And this is kind of showing you how I have not yet gotten the memo, but just kind of showing you what it's like to file a Freedom of Information request with the NSA. So March 28, 2010, I filed a request saying I wanted anything to do with the NSA team that was formed to solve the puzzles of the Kryptos sculpture. A couple weeks later, I get a response, and they say, are you willing to pay search fees? And I write back saying, basically, hell yes. And then a couple months later, in June, I get a nice letter from the NSA, and they say, our search for the documents have been completed. We found what you're looking for. You have been placed in the first in, first out processing queue for non-personal easy cases. But since there were several cases ahead of mine, they were unable to respond within 20 days. So 6 months go by. I contact the NSA again, and I say, so how's my FOIA request going? And I get another very polite letters. They're saying the referenced case is actively being worked, and in fact has already made it through the first level of review. There are additional review and approval stages, and there are other cases ahead of yours, so it may be some time before you receive the response. Another 5 months go by, I write back, and I get another reply. FOIA case, it's in the final approval stages. Another few months go by, I write again, and the most recent response I got in September where it said, your FOIA case is in the final approval stages. There are a number of cases ahead of yours in that queue. So I will continue giving updates as we go along.
The NSA has solved the first three.
Yes.
But they're classified.
Correct. The NSA has solved the first three parts, but the memo saying that they've solved those three parts is classified.
Has anybody else solved any part?
Yes. The question is, has anyone else solved the first three parts? And yes. The first person to publicly announce a solution was a man named Jim Galogly in 1999. He's a California computer scientist, and there were several articles about that. I think that, Johnny X, I think that's when you may have first heard about it, because there was international press about it. Then after Jim Galogly's announcement, then the CIA said, well, that a year earlier, someone internal to the CIA named David Stein had also solved those first three parts. But it had just been kind of announced internally. It hadn't been announced to the public, because Kryptos was never created as a public challenge. It was just created as a challenge to the employees at the CIA. So then after the CIA came forward and said, well, they had David Stein who'd solved those first three parts in 1998. Then the NSA came forward and said, well, we have a team that solved those three parts too, but we're not going to tell you who and we're not going to tell you when, which is very NSA. The joke in Washington is it stands for no such agency.
It's not just the solution, it's also the methodology.
I believe that the reason that the NSA report is classified is because the methods are potentially classified, yes. I haven't seen the report, so I can't say for sure. I've talked to people at the NSA, I've talked to people at the CIA.
The civilian publishing includes methodology, right?
I think he's trying to get to what the hell does it say?
But I mean, like
Can we get a microphone to him so it doesn't just sound like blanks? Yeah. Okay.
The question is, if the methodology on how the first three have been solved is also published, that may give you some insight into number 4.
We know how the first three parts were solved.
Okay.
Of the first three parts. I definitely wasn't the first person to do it, but I have solved them, and I can tell you what those three parts say. And the methods are pretty basic. It's visionary polyalphabetic systems, cryptographic methods that were invented, I think, in the 1700s or 1800s for the first two parts. And I have slides where I'm going to show that to you. And then the third part was just a basic transposition system. But getting things unclassified and releasable to the public is just a really difficult, long, bureaucratic process. I've also heard through another contact in DC that there's an intelligence database, and I don't know if anyone here has top secret clearance, and you probably wouldn't admit it if you did, but I'll just tell you that there's a database called NWICX, I think, or NWICS, and it's sort of like a Google search for the intelligence community, so you can like set up a search term like Kryptos and see if anything's going through that's classified about Kryptos. And what I've heard is that there was a team in 2007 that was part of the IARPA section, Advanced Research Projects, and they were working on Skype decryption and coming up with some programs for that. And along with that, they were running their methodology on various historical ciphers to see how their programs worked on those ciphers. One of the ciphers that they put their methodology on was Kryptos. And I've heard that there's a report by this team that's also circulating, which I have not been able to get my hands on. And if anyone here can get at it, I would be very interested if you kind of pass it my way. Any other questions so far? Okay, all right. Okay, so coming back to Kryptos and the research I was able to do that was in the public domain or available in some way was I was contacting every art gallery where Jim Sanborn had ever exhibited art and asking, what else has he exhibited? Can you show me a list of everything Sanborn's ever done? His agent said it's impossible to make a list of everything Jim Sanborn's ever done, so I said, okay, I'll make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done. So I started just everyone. I contacted every museum that I could think of, every art gallery I could think of. I contacted the Smithsonian, and my apartment just started filling up with these copies of programs from different art gallery shows and different folders that were being copied from Smithsonian files. And there's a lot of stories there. Like in one of these folders I got from the Smithsonian, as I'm going through it, one of the pages in there was all in Russian. And looking at it, I can read a little bit of Cyrillic. And looking at the page, I realized that I was looking at an internal memo from the KGB, a classified internal memo from the KGB that was tucked into one of these folders in the Smithsonian files about Jim Sanborn's art. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So I called, at the time I was also talking to the FBI about the war on terrorism, so I called them up and I said, hey, I'm holding a classified document. What should I do with it? And they said, oh, what is it? I said, well, it's in Russian. And they got very confused. And they asked me to explain what it was and how I'd gotten it. And then they said, well, who classified it? And I said, well, it was KGB. And they go, oh, and they said, we don't care about that. Because if I was holding a classified document from our country, they'd care. But a classified document from some other country, that was okay. So, yeah, I eventually found out why that document was there, and it depends how much time I have as to whether or not I can go into it. But what I found out is that with all this research, another thing I found out was that after Sanborn had created Kryptos, which is the first sculpture he'd ever made with encryption, and the first sculpture he'd ever even made with text of any kind. But after Kryptos, he went through this whole phase of his career, like the blue period or something, but a phase where he was doing several sculptures with text, several sculptures with encryption. And I found out that right after he created Kryptos, he created this other piece called the Untitled Kryptos piece, which was tracked down and went through various hands, and the current location is in the home of a private collector in Los Angeles. I tracked down that collector and I said, hi, can I come take pictures of the sculpture in your backyard? And he said, sure. And I went in and took a look, and it's got these two sides. One side is, and I'll show some close-ups in a minute, but one side is all kind of Latin, Roman text that we can read, and the other side is all Russian Cyrillic text. And the side that we can read has the text of Kryptos from the CIA, but with a few differences. And that sculpture, so at the top left is the one that we're seeing from the home of the private collector. There's a larger version of it, which you can see at the bottom right. It's a different sculpture, very similar. It's about 20% larger. That one you can see at the Hirshhorn Museum if you go to Washington, D.C., that oval-shaped museum, and it's right outside the main door. It's called Antipodes, and it was also called, I think, the Covert Balance. And Sanborn liked it because on the one side it was encrypted text from the CIA, and on the other side was encrypted text from the KGB. So that document that I found was the plain text for an encrypted text that was carved into the sculpture right there that's outside the Hirshhorn Museum. And then the Russian text was also put onto another sculpture of Sanborn's, which is called the Cyrillic Projector. This one is currently at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, and it has about the top 80% of the encrypted Russian text from the Antipodes sculpture, or the Untitled Kryptos piece sculpture. And this one had been there for several years, uncracked. The students walking by it every day didn't know what it was. They thought maybe it was Greek, maybe it had something to do with the local fraternities. But when we found out about it, we transcribed it. Again, long story short, we cracked it, and it came out to be extracts from classified KGB documents, one of them being that document that I found in the Smithsonian folder. So, other differences between the Untitled Kryptos piece and Kryptos, and this was when I discovered when I went into this guy's backyard and took a look. One is that, and I'll get to this, the three parts of Kryptos that we can read. Part 3 starts with these letters, ENDYAHR. However, this is on the Untitled piece, on Antipodes. On Kryptos itself at CIA, the part 1 starts with different ciphertext. The ENDYAHR line starts as part 3. Why did he rearrange it? We don't know. Another thing is on the Untitled piece, we have these two dots after those letters. These dots, the ciphertext is the same, MOQQ, the SFD, that's the same as on Kryptos, but the dots do not appear on Kryptos. If the dots were to appear on Kryptos, they'd probably be around this section right here. So I'll tell you more about now the other two plates on Kryptos. So we have the two plates with 4 ciphers. Then on the other 2 plates, we have a Vigenère tableau. And they make a cipher alphabet. One way to make a cipher alphabet is you take a keyword. In this case, the keyword is the word Kryptos. So you start with a 26-letter alphabet. You take out the letters of Kryptos. You put them at the left. You have the rest of the letters there. So you still end up with 26 letters, just scrambled in a predefined way. Now, you could take that cipher alphabet, and you could make a tableau by taking the Kryptos cipher alphabet and then shifting it by 1, going all the way down a tableau. And then you get these nice diagonals, BCD. Another thing you would see is that you could read the word Kryptos here, and if you read down this left column, you could also read the word Kryptos. Right? Now, imagine that there's a different word spelled down that left-hand column. And that is exactly what is used for part 1 of Kryptos. We start off with the Kryptos cipher alphabet, and then we have another key, which is the word palimpsest. Palimpsest is a word for a scroll that has had a message written on it. Then that message was scraped off, and another message was written on it, so that you can still see bits of the old message showing through. And if you have the tableau here with the Kryptos cipher alphabet and palimpsest, it's called there's variations of Visionaries, it's called a Quagmire 3 variation. And then you can use that to decrypt what's called K1, part 1 of Kryptos, which starts up here, part 1, ciphertext EMUFPHZ, those are the first letters. And you line them up with the tableau. So we have Kryptos, and we have palimpsest, and you take the EMUFP, so E, and then you go up. E becomes a B, M becomes an E, U becomes a T, keep going like that, B, E, T, W, E, E, N, between. And you keep repeating the tableau, and you can pull out the entire plain text that way. So part 1, this is the ciphertext, kind of difficult to see in this light. Using the keys of Kryptos and palimpsest, comes out to the plain text. Between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion or occlusion. There's a cue there. Asked Sanborn about that. I said, is it a mistake? He said, no. He said, it's deliberate. But it's not what it is so important, it's where it is. It's the orientation or the positioning. Don't know what that means either. A clue, a clue. Part 2 starts at the 3rd row here, goes down to the bottom of this plate. Ciphertext there. You can see a couple question marks in the text. Sanborn did make a mistake here. He admitted to a mistake a few years ago. You may have heard the news stories about that, where he said he'd left out a letter at the very bottom. He said he did it for aesthetic reasons, that he was trying to get things to fit on the line. But because it's a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, when you take out a letter, it kind of changes everything after it. It's not a straight one-to-one substitution. So the plain text, it's the same method as part 1, but instead of the keys of Kryptos and palimpsest, it's the keys of Kryptos and abscissa. Abscissa is the x-coordinate on a graph. Plain text is, it was totally invisible. How's that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field, X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north. 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. ID by rows. Or at least that last part was ID by rows until we found out that there was a mistake. What it actually should say is X, layer 2, because all the letters shift when you move them. So several more mysteries here. WW, who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was a mystery for a while, but Sanborn finally confirmed. It stands for William Webster. Judge Webster was the director of the CIA at the time that the sculpture was installed. Latitude and longitude coordinates, those point to CIA headquarters. Some people thought that maybe they pointed directly to Kryptos, but they don't. And anyone here who's played with geocaching will probably recognize that part where it says 6.5 seconds north. Not 6 seconds, not 7 seconds, 6.5 seconds north. So what is a tenth of a second of latitude? Anyone who's geocaching knows that a tenth of a second latitude is a pretty specific location. It's about 10 feet across. So, and I'll show you a picture of where we think that the coordinates point to. It points to about 150 feet southeast of the sculpture. We've had people go there, didn't see anything unusual. So why does it point there? We don't know. Then part 3 starts at the top of this plate. And here's those ENDYAHR lines that are part 1 on the Untitled Kryptos piece. Notice also that these letters, if you can see them, I'll have a close-up in a minute, are a little bit out of alignment. There's a lot of speculation as to why that is. Ciphertext is here. Those of you that have played with crypto will notice that the ciphertext looks a little different because you'll see a lot of vowels. You know, E, T, A, the most frequent letters in the frequently used letters in the English alphabet. So this is not a substitution system. This is a transposition system. The question is, did the artist know exactly where the sculpture was going to be? The answer is yes. There was a tree there. And the tree had a pit, you know, for when you're planting a tree. And as they were building the new headquarters building, he chose that location specifically because he liked that there was already a hole there because he was going to put a fountain at the base of the sculpture. And he also said that when he was figuring out the latitude and longitude that he used, he made sure that he was accurate because he used a nearby USGS, United States Geological Service benchmark to exactly know where the latitude and longitude were near there. So, part 3, transposition, there's different methods of solving it. This is one method I came up with, where if you take all the letters in part 3 and you line them up, and then you start here at the far right where the S is, and then you count down by 4. 1, 2, 3, wrap around, 4 to an L, count down 4 to an O, count down to a W, L, Y, S, L, O, W, L, Y, slowly. And you keep doing that through the diagonals, and you get the whole plain text. Slowly, desperately slowly. The remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. And then, widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker, but presently details of the room within emerged from the mist. X. Can you see anything? Q. Who recognizes it? Howard Carter. This was a paraphrased extract from the diary of archaeologist Howard Carter, November 26, 1922, on the day that he discovered King Tut's tomb. So, and there's part 4. Can't tell you what it says. We don't know. 97 characters. There are some repeating patterns in it, some doubled letters. Lots of speculation has gone into this. Sanborn has offered some clues, but we still haven't been able to solve it. So the latitude and longitude. This is an overhead view of CIA headquarters. On the right-hand side, we have the original headquarters building. Left-hand side, this is the new headquarters building that was built, this white building with the funny-shaped roof in the middle. That's the employee cafeteria. So the cafeteria, the employees can sit there. They can look through a series of glass walls that are here out to this courtyard. Sanborn designed this courtyard. Kryptos is about there. He also designed several pieces here outside the new entrance to the new headquarters building. Another close-up view, different time of year. So again, we have the white roof, cafeteria. There's a semicircular landscaped area, a duck pond, some slabs of rock here. Kryptos is that little squiggle there. Question was, how do you get satellite pictures of the CIA at different times of year? As with everything else, Google. So, new headquarters building. We have a glass atrium here. Sanborn also designed some pieces out here outside the front entrance. Another satellite view of the CIA, different time of year. So again, we have the glass here. We have some slabs of rock here. Kryptos is here. And you can see the duck pond. So you can also see that there's sort of a diagonal. We believe that the latitude and longitude point to right about here, about where the roof, the line is crossing the semicircular landscaped area. The small gray circles are just lunch tables that are there. You can kind of drag around and put different places. Here's another close-up of the pieces outside the front entrance. And those pieces outside the front entrance, they're large granite slabs that are tilted up out of the ground, sort of like a geological seam. And in between the slabs, there are sheets of copper with Morse code messages punched through them. They say things like SOS, shadow forces, digital interpretatu, lucid memory, T is your position. This was just to mess with the Russians? Yeah. And I've asked Sanborn, I've said, you know, these sheets of copper that kind of disappear under the granite, do the messages keep going under the granite? Like where it says T is your position, is it actually saying what is your position? And we just can't see the first part of the word what. And he said yes. So I have no idea how we're supposed to see the rest of the Morse code there. No. There's also an engraved compass rose and a lodestone. He's made other pieces around the DC area that also have engraved compass roses because that's magnetism. We've tried looking at maps and seeing where the compass roses point to see if there's an intersection point. And haven't found anything interesting there. So, and then here's just some lines drawn. So again, with the latitude and longitude coordinates pointing to about here, It's possible that it's not pointing to that spot, but it's something in relation. So we have this diagonal here and this diagonal here, and maybe we're supposed to look at something similar here with the coordinates. We don't know. Just lots of different theories. Right. One of the oldest traditions is to find ways to waste the enemy's time. Yeah. And so, was there another question?
Yeah. The things that are underground right now, the slabs underground right now, go to see anything more?
The question is, has anyone gone digging around the slabs to see if there's anything else down there? If I could have brought a shovel, I would have. It's difficult to get inside. You know, there's, like I said, big guys with guns guarding this thing. It's difficult to get in there.
Even though there are guys with guns, that isn't meaning that they don't have to dig.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to get another invitation back on site. Every time I meet someone who's worked at Langley or knows someone who works at Langley, I'm thinking, well, you know, they have family days every so often when you can, you know, bring your kids to work day, you know, and I could be like someone's cousin or daughter or granddaughter. So anyone here works at Langley, hi, you know, come over and say hi. So, and in that row outside, there is this one unmarked block that doesn't have any Morse code messages on it. It's kind of odd that it's there. It might have something to do. Maybe it's like to solve the puzzle, go look at this block. This is the only picture that we have of it, to my knowledge. Okay. A couple other speculations, and then I'll wrap up. On the Visioneer side, on the right-hand side, the letters here should match the cipher alphabet, E, F, G, H, I, J, L, M, N. But it goes E, F, G, H, I, L, L, M, N. So there's two L's, two lines that end with the letter L. Why is that? We don't know. It's possible that it's a clue. And Sanborn did do this with another of his sculptures, the Cyrillic projector. Cyrillic projector was, the method of cryptography was, again, a Visioneer system, but instead of Quagmire 3, it was a Quagmire 2. So the way the alphabets were used was a little bit different. The key words were the words Tien and Medusa, meaning shadow, and Medusa as in the mythological creature. And if you're standing there at night and looking, and you look at the text that's being beamed, you'll see the word Medusa. And anyone who knows Cyrillic, this will jump out because some of these letters are clearly not Russian. Like you don't have a D in the Cyrillic alphabet. You don't have an S in the Cyrillic alphabet. So this word Medusa, which in Cyrillic turns out to be one of the keys to crack the code, where did it come from on the sculpture? And one of our researchers, John Wilson, went out there and took a look, and he discovered that the word Medusa was beamed from the third line of the sculpture right here. And he noticed something unusual right there, which is there's an extra bolt right on that row. And it's a little difficult to see in this picture, but if you look at it from the other side, it's real clear there's an extra bolt there. It's the only bolt like that on the entire sculpture. So it's possible that Sanborn put that there as a way to draw the eye to that line. So maybe one reason Kryptos hasn't been solved yet is because we can't get on site to CIA to just take a really close look at the letters. Question in the back. The question was, is there any correlation between the extra L here and the missing L on the other side on the plain text? It's possible. You know, the word illusion that was spelled eclusion, it's very possible. That Q, by the way, if you look at the spot on Kryptos that generates that Q, the ciphertext letter is a K. And then there's another misspelling, which is the word underground. It's misspelled, and it has two U's. Instead of O-U-N, it's U-U-N-D. And if you look at the place that generates that extra U, the ciphertext is the letter R. So it's interesting that you have a K and an R on a sculpture named Kryptos. Might be related, might not, we don't know. Another question. Is it possible that this is reflecting a date? Yes, it's possible. I mean, we could, some people have looked at it, looking at numbers, looking at the way letters interact. I can tell you that transcribing the Cyrillic projector was a pain in the ass, because I had some people sent me many photos, and imagine trying to transcribe something in a language you don't really know, in an alphabet you're not used to. And these letters are written on a cylindrical sculpture, so you have pictures of different parts, and they're backwards. So it took a long time to transcribe it. But I remember going through the MXM, and it might be a date, but even knowing that it might be a date, the question would then be what to do with it from there. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's a good idea.
Has the CIA actually considered waterboarding the artist?
The question is, has the CIA considered waterboarding the artist? And there is sort of a saying in the intelligence community, and it's called rubber hose cryptography. Okay? And they also say when the enemy has a secret, it's going to be a race between, can it be stolen, or can it be cracked, or can you get it through interrogation? There's different methods of trying to solve something. And unfortunately, beating it out of someone is one of the methods. He was born in 1945. Kryptos is over 20 years old now, and I actually just had dinner with the artist a couple weeks ago. I organize a dinner like once every 2 years in Washington, D.C. when I go to speak at the NSA Cryptologic History Symposium. And I try to organize a dinner, and sometimes Jim Sanborn comes, and Ed Scheidt is there sometimes, and we have several Kryptos researchers. The one for this year, we met at the Zola Spy Restaurant, which is next door to the International Spy Museum, that restaurant was the decor was designed by Jim Sanborn as well. And then, so we talk to them, we buy them drinks, we try and get as much information out of them as we can. And then at the end of the evening, we write down everything they said, and we transcribe it and try and get any hints we can. But the impression that many of us had from the most recent dinner is that Sanborn is ready for this thing to be solved, that 20 years is long enough to wait. Before, when we would ask him questions like, well, could this be it, could this be it, could this be it, and he would be very vague, like, oh, it's possible, anything's possible. But now when we're asking questions saying, is it this, he's saying no. We say, he said no. So, and he also offered a hint. Let me get to that. This is Ed Scheidt. He also said that, I'll come back to that about Sanborn, but Scheidt said that he designed the systems on Kryptos, and he did things to mask the English in Part 4. That the first 3 parts we solved having the benefits of the mathematical properties of the English language, knowing which words are there, which letters are most frequent. But he said he masked that in Part 4. That Part 4 cannot be solved through a weighting of the English language. That's the specific terms that he used. He also said we solved the first 3 parts without recovering the keys first. He said he used a little bit of steganography, a little bit of stego, a concealment with Part 4. But he has confirmed that it's solvable, that the answer is in English. He said they did discuss possibly having it in some long, ancient, no longer remembered language, but they decided that Part 4 would be in English, and he's also confirmed that it uses all of the letters. So, 2010, Sanborn offered a hint. Again, made international news. He released this through the New York Times, and he said that in Part 4, the ciphertext letters that are here, NYP, VTT, decrypt to the word Berlin, B-E-R-L-I-N. He's confirmed that it's not just the letters, it's not like it says Amber Line and we just have the letters there, but it means Berlin, the city, and it's a one-to-one correspondence. N means B, Y means E, and so big flurry of activity trying to figure out, can we get more out of Part 4 from this? There's some interesting theories and speculation, especially having to do with converting the letters into binary and then possibly doing XOR on them and trying to get other letters out of them. But again, we haven't solved Part 4 yet. We also had someone, Robert Mattson from SAIC, did some interesting research where he used a Visioneer system and said, if we know that it's Visioneer, Quagmire 3, same methods as Parts 1 and 2, and we know that the plain text Berlin is right there at MYP, which keywords, like Kryptos and Epsis, Kryptos and palimpsest, which you need to have in order to generate the word Berlin right there. And he came up with a hit. And he said, if you use the keyword shifted and binary, you get the word Berlin right there. And it's very intriguing because those are shifted. You got the shifted alphabets, binary. Sanborn has done other sculptures with binary in it. So but then again, when you do it and you get the word Berlin there, but then here's what the rest of it, and it doesn't really say anything. So it's just like the word Berlin shows through, but everything around it is unreadable. And then he did more research, found there's a lot of other words that will generate Berlin at that exact spot. Along with shifted binary, you can get sapsucker overused will also generate Berlin there, or witched filamentary. So maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. We don't know. We've done research by saying, okay, if the word Berlin is there, do we have a crib for what might come right after it? What word could follow Berlin? Could it be Berlin Wall? What word could precede Berlin? West Berlin, East Berlin, Berliner, the famous quote, Ich bin ein Berliner. Haven't found anything. Keep looking. Sanborn has also said that all 4 parts of Kryptos are important for the solution. And then coming back here, very briefly, to part 3, we have these out-of-alignment letters. I've shown this slide to Sanborn, and he has pointed at them. And he's asked, has anyone figured anything else out about these? He says they're important. Don't know what it means. But we're doing some interesting research right now, and some of you who got to PhreakNIC last night may have seen me and some others huddled over a table on the 9th floor. And we're following a theory that this is a hint that you need to convert the letters into a 5-digit binary, like the old teletype machines, those tapes that would come out, the Baudot code, ITA2, and then maybe be doing some interesting XORing there. So if you've seen me scribbling 1s and 0s all day, that's why I'm doing that. And anyone else that wants to help with that project, I'm happy to give you more info on that. Another thing that Sanborn has recently said is that he doesn't like this picture of Kryptos. He says, this picture is ugly. He says, that's from the side. He says he wants this picture to be the main picture. He says, that's from the front. So, don't know what that means, but he's insistent on it. Maybe the fact that we've got the cross there and it's the 4 quadrants? Don't know. The first picture was the main picture that the CIA used. Since then, the other picture Sanborn has given to me. So Berlin, another theory that we're tracking down is maybe Berlin has something to do with the Berlin Wall. Kryptos was created between 1988 and 1990, right around the time that the Berlin Wall was falling. So perhaps Sanborn encrypted something to do with Berlin onto the sculpture. Also, some pieces of the Berlin Wall are now at CIA. There's a Berlin Wall monument there. It's possible that Sanborn knew that these pieces were going to be a monument, and that the coordinates are supposed to point to where he thought the monument was going to be, but since the monument wasn't actually dedicated until 1992, that they ended up putting it somewhere else. It's theory. Don't know. The actual location of the Berlin Wall monument, again, cafeteria, Kryptos, the monument's down here, but maybe that was supposed to be the original location. We don't know. Also, just as a don't believe everything you see, CIA, when they received these stones, there was no paint on them. They were unmarked. The graffiti was added later by another artist. So. So if he's beaten with the rubber hose and he doesn't reveal the answer, what happens to the solution? Sanborn has placed the solution into 2 safe deposit boxes in different parts of the United States. The key to one safe deposit box is held by his girlfriend, J. Coe. The other key is held by a member of his extended family in the southwestern United States. They don't know the answers. They don't know the answer to Kryptos. So the question is, how do they know when to open the safe deposit box? And the thing is he's left with them a K4 test. How do you get them to know that the Part 4 has been solved without knowing what the answer is? And what they're to do is, if someone comes to them and says, I've solved Part 4, then his girlfriend is supposed to challenge the person and say, okay, what is the 22nd letter? And if someone answers correctly, then she says, okay, what is the 37th letter? They answer correctly. And once she has enough points of agreement, then she can say, okay, this is enough, and then she'll go and open the safe deposit box. So, just a couple quick things about Kryptos and pop culture. The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. American version of the book jacket actually has 5 puzzles hidden in the artwork. 2 of them refer to Kryptos. It's Dan Brown giving hints as to the subject of his next novel, The Lost Symbol, which took place in Washington, D.C. One of them is hidden in this kind of brown tear on the back of the book. Very faintly are the words "only WW knows" from part 2 of Kryptos. Also on the back of the book, near the blurbs, vertically, very faintly, light red on dark red, are the latitude and longitude coordinates, 37 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north. Though it says 37 degrees here, in Kryptos decrypts to 38 degrees. I've asked Dan Brown about that, and I says, you know, I said, the book jacket says 37, but Kryptos says 38. And he says, yes, the discrepancy is intentional. Okay, and then later on I was talking to Brown's publisher, and we were talking about the marketing for the lost symbol. I said, you know, on the book jacket it says 37, but Kryptos says 38. And the publisher said, yes, the discrepancy is intentional. Don't know what it means. That was lost symbol. As I said, I helped Dan Brown with some of the research for the book, and he named a character after me. So there's a character in the book named Nola K, which is an anagram form of Elonka. So why hasn't K4 been solved yet? It's short, 97 characters, and it's difficult to solve something that short. It's possible there's a key on site at CIA, though Sanborn has said he's selling a model of Kryptos about this big. And we've asked him, is there enough information on this model to solve Kryptos? And he has said yes, which implies we don't need a key that's on CIA grounds. Then again, he may be misdirecting us. We may have missed something. We may have been misdirected. It's also possible that he just screwed it up, that Part 4 has a mistake, which makes it unsolvable. But he's gone through and he's announced the other mistakes that he's had, like that mistake in Part 2. And when I've gone out to dinner with Ed Scheidt, and Ed Scheidt has been cagey sometimes about whether or not he knows the answer to Part 4. Sometimes he says he's designed it. Sometimes he says he knows what it says. Sometimes he says, I'll leave that to Sanborn. Sometimes he said, I don't know. You're very CIA. And I've gone at him saying, how do you know that K4 is done right? How do you know that Sanborn didn't just screw it up? And Scheidt leaned across the table and he said, I'm sure it's done right. So says Scheidt. So, summary. Kryptos, 4 codes, 3 of the 4 have been solved. Why is it unsolved? Could be a mistake, could be short, there might be a clue on CIA, we might have been misdirected. But both Jim Sanborn, the artist, and Ed Scheidt from CIA have said it is solvable. My own goal is not necessarily to solve it. I just want to see it solved. I've been working on this thing for 10 years now. I want it off my plate. So if I can help by sharing information about Kryptos or being kind of the information clearinghouse for it, I'm perfectly happy for someone else to solve it. If you want more information, there's a book. You can go to my website, elonka.com. Join our discussion group. Join our discussion group. We have a Yahoo group, so just send an email to kryptos-subscribe@yahoogroups.com. There's also a really good documentary on PBS, Nova Science Now. I also wrote 2 articles about Kryptos in this book called Secrets of the Lost Symbol. It's a book by several people discussing the fact and fiction of Brown's latest novel, what he got right, what he got wrong, mostly what he got wrong. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
I just wanted to mention we will be working on some of the crypto stuff up on the 9th floor, and I've got the complete Yahoo Kryptos group email archives on a thumb drive. I brought it in for Elonka, but I figure as long as I've got it here, if anyone else would like to get it, it's in inbox format. There's about 14,000 messages. It's a lot easier to search it locally on your own machine than to go through Yahoo's search interface. We'll just pass the thumb drive around, and you feel free to download the stuff and import it into your favorite email reader. Lots of good info there.
Any other questions?
You said that on that one picture that you said that you had to look at the monument area that certain way, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Have they looked at that like through steganography on that?
The question is, in terms of the way Sanborn said sculpture is supposed to be looked at, have we looked at it and discovered anything perhaps with steganography or something hidden? We've looked and looked and looked, and people have looked at the way that the letters are carved, or the kerning of the letters, which letters are closer together than others. And even if we see something, like people have said, well, what if you look at it from above and it sort of looks like an S shape? Is it paper coming out of a printer? Does it mean that we have 2 halves of a different cylinder? He likes playing with light. Is it possible that with these other sculptures where light is beaming through the letters that we need to get near Kryptos and shine a light and then see the way the shadows show up on the other side, maybe the way the letters become sort of a thin lines, maybe there's some sort of a Morse code message. There's so many different permutations. It's difficult to say which one in particular is going to crack it open. My own belief is that the answer is going to come not from necessarily just someone with a brilliant cryptanalytic mind, because we've had the big computers and the government agencies and people with PhDs looking at it, we haven't solved it. I think the answer is going to come out of left field, that someone's going to come up with something and they're going to be moving things around and it's going to come apart that way. But then again, I may be wrong. I don't know.
You said on the 4th floor, like what did you...
Ninth floor.
Ninth, sorry. What did you discover, like, new this week that prompts that as far as things?
Let me pull up K4 here. The question, yeah. So what somebody's been playing with, and he's been saying for a while that he's recovered about 40% of the plain text, and we're trying to verify it, is he's been starting, of course, from the Berlin. So NYP, VTT is Berlin. And he's been trying to work out from that both in this direction and coming back here. And what he's been doing is he's been converting the letters into digraphs, so 2-letter pairs, and then taking those digraphs, and he has a cipher alphabet, so he assigns a numerical value to each letter. Then you take that numerical value and convert it into a 5-digit binary, which is based on the ITA2, the Baudot system. That you take the 2 letters in the digraph, and you XOR them together and end up with another number. And then you apply that to a key. The key he's getting also from the ciphertext, so it's sort of an auto key or a rolling key system, where he's taking, Kryptos has 7 letters, so he's taking the OBKR, UOX, 7 letters, and then OGHU, LBS, 7 letters. And then he's scrambling these, converting those into binary, and then XORing those with the product of the first digraph, and then getting another number. And it's an interesting system. You can follow it step by step, and he comes up with a plain text that stretches out from Berlin, and it says USAR forces EUR, Europe, Berlin Brigade. And there was a unit that was in Berlin. So it's about 40 characters of readable plain text. The problem with it is that you follow it step by step, and you end up with a number from all these XORing, and you end up with a number that you then have to convert back into letters. The problem is when you're converting that number back into letters, there's 22 possible digraphs that you could get from that one number. So it's sort of like taking a strip cipher where you have 22 possible pairs, 22, 22, 22, and you're shifting them up and down trying to find a readable plain text. He has this one with the Berlin Brigade, but it's possible that he's just seeing what he wants to see, and there might be other plain texts in there as well, which is why I'm wondering if anyone here has experience with, say, dictionary attacks. And language processing will give you a set of 22 digraphs, and let's see what other plain text that we can get from those letters. It's a very tedious, time-consuming, cumbersome process, but basically what I see is he's doing is he's brute forcing it. And we're thinking that if we can get a full readable plain text, brute forcing it, and then we can go back and figure out, well, what's the elegant method for producing the same plain text? Or maybe he's just completely wrong. We don't know. We're looking at it right now.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that the rest of the Kryptos cipher, once you figure out how the other 3 parts are done, it's very easy. It's a very elegant solution, and you can encrypt and decrypt pretty easily. The method that's being used right now is not elegant, but there are parts of it that look like they might be worth investigating. And one of the things that we had noticed last night is that, was it the cipher key or the plain text key? One of the keys we were working with, I can't remember which one it was, we noted down, he was skipping every 11th character and then rotating back, but there were a couple places where he screwed up, and instead of skipping every 11th character, he skipped to the 12th character in the alphabet before rotating back, which would give you some, if that was the actual key, it would give you some readable plain text results, but it would screw up other parts of the code, which was kind of what we were seeing, and portions of it did look elegant and worth investigating tonight, which is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I actually have more of an answer on that, because I think instead of going, I wish I had a whiteboard, but basically if you take the letters of the alphabet and you write them into a grid in a pattern of 7, and then you apply Kryptos as a keyword, and then you alphabetize the letters of Kryptos. So you're scrambling the columns, and then you get that cipher alphabet. So some of them would have 4 rows and some would have 3 rows, and that's why we were getting the 11 to 12. But I like your idea of trying with just 11 and just 12. Anyway, this would be better if I had a whiteboard.
Yeah, it only works with 11. If you do 12, you're leaving out half the alphabet, because 26 characters, you skip an alphabet, you skip every 12, you're going to miss out on it.
Yeah.
It seems odd that somebody would screw up on 97 characters. You know, it doesn't, you're talking about, oh, there's an accident. It's not enough characters. I mean,
It doesn't surprise me, because think of your typical standard office letter. You know, dear Joe, thank you for submitting a payment. And just humans, we err, we make mistakes, and typos are so easy to make, even with plain text where you're reading. You know the language. Imagine if a typo creeps in with ciphertext, how much more difficult it's going to be to spot it.
I have a funny, quick story that you may or may not remember from PhreakNIC 6. Oscar kind of reminded me when he mentioned the occasional putting out just gibberish, encrypted gibberish to delay, confuse the enemy, and make them waste their time. And remember the PhreakNIC 6 DNA code? I
Yes.
really thought of this when
Yes.
you mentioned you kept plying folks with alcohol to see
Yes.
if they would reveal anything.
And that's actually, I think, when I stopped working on the codes that you were
Yeah.
producing, because I come to PhreakNIC to party, and here you are doing these codes, and I can crack the codes, but they're getting in the way of my drinking. So.
Yes, well, yes, the PhreakNIC 6 one, though, gave you a lot of trouble. And those of you who are at PhreakNIC 6, I called it the DNA code because the characters used to encode it were all TG and AC components of DNA. And what I had done with the code is the first 17 or 18 lines, I'd found a program to generate, I think there's stereogram
Stereo
images.
vision, yeah, we have
the
to
pictures
unfocus
you
your
look
eyes.
into and the 3D image pops out, and I found a program that would let you do that with text. So the first part of the code wasn't actually encrypted anything. You just stared at it long enough, and the character's DNA would pop out of it. And Elonka had broken every single code I'd written for every con for the past previous years. She wasn't getting anywhere on this one. It was driving her freaking nuts. And how did she figure it out? She kept talking to me about codes, and she kept refilling my dreams while we were talking until I screwed up, and bang, she had it by the end of the night.
Whatever it takes.
One thing that occurred to me was that it could be that part of it is encoded in one manner, part in another, but the first part may give a part of a key or a clue to what the pattern is for the rest of it.
Right. Absolutely right. And so that the Visionaire system where we found with the keys shifted in binary, and we're just finding the word Berlin, but we're not finding any other intelligible text, that's very possible. That it's just the first layer of encryption. And like in part 2 where it said X layer 2, that we then have to go on to another layer. It's possible. Could be a red herring too. Anything's possible.
Which part of the code are the letters misaligned?
The ENDYAHR, that's in part 3 where it's slowly, desperately slowly, the remains of passage debris.
Oh, what if the steganography? Too much drink, sorry.
Yeah.
If the misaligned letters may play a part in the strange 11-12 options.
Yeah, it's possible. The fact that there's 5 misaligned letters is possibly a clue for the Baudot code, the old teletype code. The fact that it's got ENDYAHR, we have a pattern where the Y and the A are raised and the R is raised, so possibly that means 01101. Maybe that's an XOR that we need to apply against everything. There's so many different permutations to try. How many times have I personally seen Kryptos? One time. One time. I've tried many, many other ways to get back in. I've offered to give other talks. When they had the 20th anniversary of Kryptos and they had a sort of a ceremony there, and I contacted them months, I think a year ahead of time, saying, hey, I'd love to come on site and give a talk about Kryptos. Never heard back. I tried contacting the media relations people. The best I've been able to do right now is that I know people who work on site at Langley. So when I need something measured or something looked at, I contact those people and they go and take a look, and then they usually send me something under a pseudonym, and then I let some time pass, and then I'll post that to the list. Some of them are kind of clever at the way they're doing things. Like we asked how thick the plates were because we're trying to make a 3D model of Kryptos. So we needed to measure the width of the plate. So but somebody didn't want to go out there with a tape measure, and measure Kryptos, with all the security cameras around. So what he did is he had a gum wrapper, an aluminum foil gum wrapper, and he went up to Kryptos and he pressed the gum wrapper against the side of the sculpture, made creases for it to get the width of the plate, then went back to his desk and then measured the creases that were in the gum wrapper to get me the information. Okay. Anything else? All right, wonderful questions. Thank you very much for coming to the talk. Yeah, and if you want to help with the dictionary attack, let me know. $20, and I'll autograph them as soon as I get wrapped up.